Go. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the first Zoom US Waszp Forum. Hopefully we get a few more participants as we go along, but I figure it's time to go ahead and kick this off. So my name's Sam Blouin. I'm the VP of the US Waszp class, and I am joined today by two super studs of our class, Connor Blouin and Reed Baldridge. Welcome, gentlemen. Before we dive in, I did just want to lay out the format for today's discussion. We're going to start out with two short sessions. One, Connor's going to take us through his thoughts on upwind technique, followed by Reed, who's going to kind of cover things on the downwind side. In between each session, we will pause to take one or two kind of related questions to the topic. And then after both presentations are over, we're going to open up the floor for kind of any topic that you guys want to cover. I will be keeping everybody on mute, but please use the chat functionality to pass questions along. Feel free to type them at any point. I will just kind of take them as they come in the order that you guys send them. So with that in mind, I would like to turn it over to our first presenter of the night. This man, looking through his resume, has consistently finished in the top of the fleet here in the US. He's claimed the Atlantic Coast Championship before, and of course the 2018 US National title. So Connor Blouin, thank you for being here tonight.
Thank you, Sam.
So I've asked you here to talk a little bit about your upwind technique. Perhaps you can take us through kind of what you look for when you're sailing upwind.
Okay, so I know it's been a couple of years since the old foil was in existence, but I'm still thinking about the new foil in terms of the context of the old foil, and I've been playing around with a lot of things, trying to test them out. And with the old foil in particular, the tips were very far away from the water at all times, and the general thinking was the boat needed to be incredibly bow up to generate extra lift, and the boat could be incredibly heeled to windward because the tips were very far from the edges of the water. Now that we have a much bigger platform with this new foil, which is, and it's a lot bigger than the old foil, you're constantly balancing the ability to be high out of the water with the ability to heel the boat to windward. And basically it's made it so that you have just a much bigger base amount of lift on all of your foils, so you don't need, the boat doesn't need to be quite as heel to windward. All of that's doing is, it doesn't need to be as bow up as it used to be, because it's just creating significantly more drag. So most of the time when I go out sailing upwind, I'm trying to find a much more even setting where the foils are in balance with each other. If I'm too far bowed down, the boat feels like it's constantly trying to press up on the main foil, creating drag with the flap. And if it's too far bow up, the boat will feel like it's sailing out of the water, and the wand will feel like it's frozen in midair, and you're just kind of flying out of the water and drifting back down, depending on some of your other settings. So finding just a nice balance between the foils is a good setup. I try and keep my gantry around, somewhere between 12 and 16, just to get that kind of base level. You always want to be a little heeled to windward, but basically, if I could sum it up more simply, is the flatter it is and the more consistent the wind condition is, the higher you can be up in the water, and with a very modest amount of heel, maybe to where the wing is parallel with the water. And the more volatile it gets, meaning the more choppy, the more wavy, the more up and down patchy, I like to play with my ride height a little bit, lower it just a touch, so I have a little bit more foil to press against without the tips breaking the surface of the water. So that's kind of where I start out, basically.
Yeah, very, very nice. And we did have a question kind of come in here. If it's relatively flat water, do you just try to ride as high as you can all the time?
I think, so it's a really good question. Basically, the whole point of having the foil, when you get out of the water completely and you're completely flat, there's nothing there for your boat to generate lift. Your apparent wind gets so high that it's very difficult to generate lift. So answering that question, you know, I think generally you want to be close to as high as you can. I like to keep the wand just touching the water 90% of the time, but you want to be able to, at least when pressure hits you and things like that, to be able to heel the boat slightly to windward at times, to have something to press against, or else you're just going to go sideways. So you want to be close to as high as you can get, but you always want to be able to heel the boat slightly to windward to protect, and usually you don't do that as much with your body weight. These boats, there's just too much power there in the sail. You do it more with easing the sail, playing your control lines, things like that. And you can play your Cunningham on and off a ton in these boats. In a more extreme condition or in more extreme changes of condition, you can play your outhaul vang situation. I call it an out vang. I know it's an outhaul, but you play it on a very small scale to get basically, yes, you do want to be high, but you always want to be able to press a little bit, or else your boat's just not going to point at all.
Yeah, and are there any kind of signs that you look for so that you know if you're riding too high or too low, or do you just go by feel?
No, I look to make sure the wand's touching the water. I do paint or draw a few lines that they were kind of set arbitrarily at first along my rudder, so that I could tell kind of where the pitch was, but they've turned out to be nice height markings for myself. So like I know if the black mark or the blue mark is a foot out of the water, then I'm close, or the green mark's just touching, that I'm really, really high. So I have that sort of thing. I definitely had a few friends like come out on the water with me and take pictures of when I was riding super high or super low, just to get a kind of feel for it, or get a feel for the more than the height. The pitch is a really difficult thing to judge by just vision. So yeah, I mean, definitely as it gets windier and more unstable, you'll feel the boat much more out of control when you're upwind if you're riding really, really high. Like you'll feel every puff a lot more, is I guess what I would say.
Yeah, very good. And so, out of curiosity, do you do anything different between starboard tack and port tack?
That's a really good question. I do change slightly on my ride heights, starboard tack, and it really does depend on how tight or firm your bolt setting is right around the wand joint. The looser that is, the more you'll have to adjust this setting, but the wand is technically closer a little to the water on starboard than it is on port. So I'll play my ride height about an inch on each tack. Meaning on port tack, I'll pull it a little bit so that I'm a little higher on port to make it even. And then when I tack on the starboard, I'll lower it a little bit so that I'm not flying just constantly out of the water all the time.
Sure, makes sense.
Road question here, Connor. Which tack feels better to you, just in general? I know I kind of prefer to be on port tack. Like it just seems like the boat is more happy for me, and a lot of guys say on starboard. So I was wondering if you guys had any preference, like if it feels better on one tack or the other.
Port feels a lot better to me, Reed, but like mostly because I still don't understand this. I was talking to someone about this. I think it was Clay today. I was talking about this, but like when I pull the vang on port, and I switch back to I know there's a 3-to-3 vang right now, or a 6-to-1 vang right now, and I'm using the 4-to-1 again. But when I pull it on port, it stays in the cleat no problem, and the boat just feels much nicer. I don't know, it feels like it rides a little higher on port to me when I've got it dialed in just right. But on starboard, it feels like when I pull the vang on or whatever, even if I wrap it, I have to like use my back foot to like cleat it, and like everything feels just a little bit more wonky to me. But I can't tell you exactly why that
I was
is.
just gonna, because the wand deflection is more on port than starboard, because on starboard it's got the hull in the way, so it can't really go further
Oh,
outboard. So I don't know if there's more of a bias between the two tacks, but just a question.
it feels slightly better to me on port, but very slightly.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
And
I
that may
guess
just be because on port deck it does have more room to deflect. And so it's got a softer feeling to where it's not as responsive to the waves.
I didn't think of.
Yeah, super interesting. Something to keep in mind next time you're out on the water. Check it out. Oh,
But greater size, like I think there's a lot of these adjustments. None of them are set and forget. A lot of them change based on the conditions, and you have to be willing to play them. Like I think again, something that Reed and I talked a lot about, and I talked about with Austin as well, is that now that the boat has to be sailed, and I think that part of the is relatively undisputed, is that the boat has to be sailed, if you're sailing high, has to be sailed much flatter than it was with the previous foil, that your sail control settings matter a lot more. Your sail control settings matter a ton more than they ever have, and how much leech tension you have at any given time will relate a lot more to your pointing.
yeah. Well, speaking about controls, we did have another question come in here specifically about the ride height barrel. Connor, are you using the new ride height barrel, or are you still on, I guess,
I'm not.
version 2?
I'm using the second version still.
And so for anybody who's unaware, there's actually been 3 versions, but basically the first generation is kind of non-existent anymore. But the second one had 2 ends that spun on both sides, and the new version just spins on one side of the barrel.
Yes.
So one, basically, if you one, you have to pull more to get up higher, and the other you have to pull less, and it'll move more. But I guess you haven't had a chance to use that. With your ride height, though, in general, do you put any markings on it and any settings with the ride height barrel?
I don't particularly like. Feel like I have a good feel for it, and I know where the knot is, and I make visual. I do make sure that every day that I go out with it, I try to get it. I get a really good feel for where that knot ends up on my tramps each time, so that I know where on port tack it's this close to this grommet on the tramps, or it's this close to the X, Y, or Z on the tramps each time. But like, the thing with, I can't speak to each one of the ride height barrel adjusters, but depending on how tight or how loose it is, you could pull it one time and it slips a little bit without spinning the barrel, and that throws everything off. So I try not to lock it down too much to a single thing. But basically, if your wand is coming out of the water all the time, you're either riding too high or your pitch is crazy far back. So those are both. So if you know that you're riding pretty level and your wand is coming out all the time, you're riding way too high. And I think so. You want the wand in the water. That part, you want to keep wand movement relatively limited, because every time that wand's moving, you're getting a big change in the flap and you're creating drag. So again, there are many ways. There are 2 ways to limit that drag, and that's either putting the pitch way down so the wand stays in the water. And I think that when upwind is generally less ideal, unless you're really far bow up to begin with. And then there's controlling your ride height, lowering it. And lowering it can be advantageous at times. And I guess this would be a secondary thought to what I was saying earlier about when conditions get more volatile is, and I haven't fully been able to test this with Reed and David yet, but there definitely feel like there are moments where if you're in extreme wind conditions or really wavy conditions, where if you lower your ride height, not a ton, but a moderate amount, that you get the tips just far down enough in the water that you create a wider thing to press against. You could heel more to windward slightly without the tips cracking the surface. And it gives you a nicer platform to play on at times. So I feel like the ride height is a better adjustment than your pitch. But no, I don't use markings.
Yeah, something that clearly works kind of in sync together and can be used differently in different modes. Would you say that's true?
Say that one more time. I'm sorry.
You can adjust the ride height control using, like you said, using the rear foil or the main foil, but you want to adjust it for different moding is kind of what you're saying.
Yes, absolutely. Well, you can adjust the wand movement through those things, but yes, you change it based on the moding that you would like to receive at that given point.
Great. Well, thanks, Connor. In the essence of time, I would like to flip over to Mr. Reed Baldridge here. Reed is also a superstar in our class. Reed has claimed the Atlantic Coast Championship title and, of course, finished second at the inaugural International Waszp Games in Lake Garda. Thanks for joining us, Reed.
Thank you for having me.
Well, Reed, many of us have seen you sail. We know that you are at least it seems like you're particularly fast off wind and on the reaching. Give us some advice. Tell us how you do it.
So there's a lot that goes into it. One, especially fast downwind because it doesn't have a high priority on hiking, which as Connor would love to tell everybody that I don't like to do, but I'm working on it. But basically there are a couple things that are constants and must-haves that have to go into the downwind setup before we can start anything with the foil. And most of these have to do with the sail setup. So a couple things, as opposed to upwind where you want to try and flatten the sail out and reduce the most amount of drag you can to try and get a really clean, flat, fair shape to the sail. Downwind, you really want to bag it out and make it as deep as possible so that you can increase your entry angle of the sail. So what that means is the knuckle forward to where the apparent breeze that you have can go as far back as you want. Obviously the Waszp is a pretty fast sailing boat, so you're going to be going faster than the breeze most of the time. And this really puts a priority again on just making sure that the sail is set up to where you can go as deep as you can. The foils have a top speed where they reach a cavitation point. So there's definitely a limiter there, and we all have the same foils. So what you can do with the way you sail and how you set up the sail is really the only way to gain on downwinds. So a couple things that I do going around the top mark. A really big point is that the outhaul and the Cunningham work together. So always ease the Cunningham first and leave it uncleated, because as you ease that outhaul, it's going to release more Cunningham as it goes. Okay, so what that's going to do is bring the clue of the sail forward away from the wing boom, or the wish boom, sorry. And I usually try and get the distance between the blocks on the wish boom between 8 and 12 inches. So that's really going to probably be more than you're used to. A lot of the guys here don't even have that kind of throw, and sometimes in the stock setup, you have to use all the line or tie your knots pretty close to where you can get that much throw, and it's going to feel weird. It's going to feel really floppy. The wish boom's going to be moving around quite a bit, but that's really how you go as low as you can. Next is the heel angle. So obviously going upwind, you want to have a little bit more windward heel, because you're really trying to push the effort that you're putting into the sail against the horizontal foil. So you push those two together, that's how you go forward, right? So now let's bring that up to horizontal or just a little bit to windward. And that's going to be, it's the same concept, I always say this, as flying a hull on a catamaran downwind. So whenever you get blown over a little bit and you heel to leeward a little bit, that's when you can really use your rudder and carve down to make sure you get back to horizontal and then a little bit to windward and get back on the edge. So even though you feel like you're horizontal in the boat, everything's flat, that's not really generating more speed because there's no force you can put on the vertical of the foil like you can a laser or something where you have to hike against it and you're using that vertical force to push against. The only thing you have is that horizontal to push against. So you have to be just a little windward heel all the time to gain speed. You see a lot of guys going downwind a little bit heel to leeward or flat, and they're going really low, but they're not actually picking up any speed. And so the way apparent wind works is the faster you go, the relative speed of the boat to the relative speed of the wind changes. And as you go faster, when you're going downwind, the angle of the wind actually goes back, so you can go further down. Actually, sorry, it goes forward, so you can turn further down. Okay, so it's definitely a give and take, and this changes a lot with breeze. So a lot of you guys will notice that whenever you get a lull or something, you have to turn up like 40 degrees or so to try and catch yourself and to stay on the foil. Which, if we just jump back to the basics again, sorry to be jumping around, but the biggest part of going downwind is staying on the foil. You know, you got to do whatever you can. If you have to pump the sail, if you have to turn back almost to upwind, if you trim in 2 blocks, if you just scoot in a little bit, you know, it's just really key to try and get through a lull or a wind shadow to try and stay on the foil to get back up and going again. It's definitely a little more, you feel the shifts a little differently, and definitely the puffs, because you're going with the wind. So you definitely have to be careful about trying to overdo it. And if you get committed to one way, like you're going a little too low and you don't change something, as soon as you feel it, then you're going to be in the water pretty soon. So it's really important to really be on top of that. Do we have any questions?
Yeah, so we did have one come through just about kind of the end of the boom setting. I'm not sure where that 39 came from.
Yeah, so in the original booms it went up to 30, and now it goes to 34. So I always put my boom at 34 just to get the most throw I can, because the longer that boom is, the harder you can pull on the outhaul to get the sail flatter going upwind. And this is going to be a longer outhaul line, so you can ease it off that much more with the extra distance. But yeah, always 34. And then sometimes if it's 10 to 12, maybe you go 32, but there's not a real big point there. Always just as long as you can get it.
Makes sense. And what do you do with your rudder downwind in terms of the pin angle?
Yeah, so this is kind of the next step as we go forward. Great question, Carl. So Connor and I have been working on a lot of this because in Charleston we get either really flat water or we get a lot of waves depending on the current versus the wind. And as we've seen it in the flatter water, let's just say that the ride height is all the same. In the flatter water, you can be a little more bow down, which makes the foils more consistent with each other, more even, to where you're reducing drag. And as you get a little more chop on, you'll find that because you're going so much faster, you're probably flying a little higher. And since you're going with the waves, your wand will be kicking out of the water a little more. So you hear that clack, 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 that we all know and love. So that's a big thing. So whenever you change your angle of attack on the main foil, which is done with the rudder foil, so if you put more lift into your rudder foil, you'll go bow down a little bit, which takes out angle of attack on the main foil, which gives it less inherent lift, excluding the flap, obviously, which, as you'll find, whenever you're going along and you have more bow down, you'll sink every time your wand goes forward. And if you go bow up a little bit, then your bow will kind of float a little bit. And so when it's wavy, it's really important that you go just a little bit more bow up and you go a little bit less ride height. This is kind of the safe mode. And this is taking it to an extreme. There's obviously a middle section where, it's little waves or moderate waves. But if you have big waves, you want to go a little lower and you want to go bow up to give your main foil the most lift it can have with the flap all the way retracted. Okay, so whenever it is retracted, which means that your wand is fully forward, which happens a lot when you have waves, that you're not going to sink down, and then you'll catch yourself with your wand, it'll come back, and that's going to be a big flap movement, which is a lot of drag. So the more your wand moves back and forth, the bigger angle delta it has, is the more drag you have, basically. So if you can minimize the distance your wand is moving back and forth, the faster you're probably going to go. And that's kind of basic for all things. And this happens upwind a little bit too. If you have more waves, you can be a little more bow up and be a little more floaty. Or if it's flat, you can be more bow down and just put the hammer down and go.
Yeah, thanks. I know it sounds like didn't
There's a lot going
fully
on there.
answer Carl's question, but there is some complexity to it, and it does seem like there is this moment where once you just keep wiping out over the waves, that you've got to find a better sweet spot of getting that bow up, kind of like you're talking about.
So the answer to Carl's question is I usually go a little bit pinned back, just for a little bit of safety, and that also helps the jibes. So whenever you jibe, you slow down, and giving your main foil a little more inherent lift with the bow up, that'll help you get through it. So on average, I go pin back going downwind and pin forward probably halfway going upwind.
Perfect. Well, thank you, Reed. Well, let's open the floor to kind of any topic now, Waszp related. I did get a message from Karen. I hope you guys can stay on just a tiny bit longer. She does want to make an announcement, so I will kind of put her on at the end. But yeah, let's open up the floor to kind of any questions, upwind, downwind, reaching, setup, whatever you guys have.
Yep. And so just one other, to just fill the space before we get one. One other rule of thumb I usually have for upwind versus downwind is when we're going upwind, I usually just try and pick an angle. So for those new guys, just picking a point on land and aiming at it, and then using the main sheet to keep yourself at the right angle and going the right way. And then downwind, I'll usually lock the main sheet off and use the rudder to keep myself up. So just if you can minimize the variable there, you can just use a little bit more rudder going downwind and a little bit more main sheet going upwind.
Very nice. And we do have a question here from Sean, joining from Australia. Fantastic. Do either of you, Connor or Reed, kind of change your ride height adjustment between upwind versus downwind?
I would say yes, a little bit, but I think the biggest change is in the rudder. Like around the bottom mark, I'll be fully back, pin back, and then going on the bottom mark, transitioning to upwind, I'll probably be putting like 2 to 2.5 to 3 turns pin forward on the rudder, and then maybe probably just a little. If it's windy out, for sure, I'll go ride height higher going upwind, just because you're going a little slower boat speed. So you need just that little bit more flap down to keep you at the same height and keep your foils out of the water. But if it's light air, like under 14, then you can be at the same ride height all the time.
Yeah, for me, I adjusted a lot more on the upwinds than on the downwinds. On the downwinds, again, a lot of it really just depends on how volatile the conditions are. But the problem, I've tried lowering it a bit on the downwinds, and I think, like Reed said, it does work a bit better if you go bow up. But it also depends, on how choppy it is, because if you go too far bow up and you don't go low enough, then you can end up pitch bowling a few times as well if the rudder cracks the water surface. At least that's been my experience. But generally on the downwinds, I'll try to be as high as I can. But the upwinds, I do play it a fair bit depending on the wave state.
The other thing you could think about is, and I gotta say honestly, I probably don't adjust it too much because I'm flying pretty high. So on the upwind, you fly just that fraction lower, just inherently because of the speed. So you can heel over a little bit more. But when you turn downwind and go faster, you're gonna be flying higher because you have more water going over the foils, but you're also flat boat.
Yes.
So tips aren't getting out, so that it's level. So you can actually be a little higher.
A little safer, higher type.
So it's almost like a wind dependent thing. Like I almost have a wind, like a knot setting for the ride height adjuster. Just because the speed of the boat going upwind versus downwind regulates the ride height as well.
Excellent. Thanks, guys. And I think we do have time for one more question. It looks like one came in regarding thread count on gantry. Now, I do have to kind of throw in my 2 cents here because we did measure these last year, and we found that all of the gantries are built ever so slightly differently. So thread count is not the best measurement to go off of. Instead, you have to actually measure from the stern of the boat to the tip of the foil to get the appropriate angle. We are currently working on a more up-to-date tuning guide, which we will put out with more information on how to measure it. So I'm sorry, guys, I stole your thunder there for just a minute, but had that conversation the other day with the group. Okay, so I believe the session is about to kick me off, but I believe.
Do you want us to answer that question or no?
Sorry, which one? Was there another one?
The gearing.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so the question is flat movement equals drag. I guess this means you also prefer minimum gearing setting. So the big answer is no. 0 gearing setting is good if you're sailing on a lake or somewhere that's really protected with no waves. But having probably a maximum of 3 full turns out on the gearing is about as far out as I go. I usually go between 3 and 2. If it's a light air / flat venue, I'll go 2 turns out. And if it's pretty choppy, I'll go 3 turns out. This is just when it's 3 turns, just giving you that extra bit of safety when you're going downwind. Whenever that wand goes forward, you want the flap to come up pretty quickly. And then also the reason for no 0 turns out is just with maneuvers. So whenever you jibe or tack, whenever the wand comes up, because you're slowing down, so you're lowering yourself on the ride height just without doing anything because you're slowing down. You want that wand movement to translate to enough flat movement to keep you up. Just as and it doesn't really slow you down between 2 and 0, but it really hurts you in the maneuvers.
I'm really sorry. I know I don't want to steal Reed's thunder, but was it about gantry or gearing was the question?
The last one from Sean Gregory was from gearing.
It was gearing. Yeah. Mine currently is at 0, 0 or 1 turn. There is a fair bit of play. You don't ever really want to go past 4 turns, has been my experience, because it puts a tremendous amount of stress on everything. My one, Reed said everything I could and more, but the one thing I would tell everybody, at least in my humble experience, is that if you move the gearing a little bit, it does affect the range that your wand travels with the flap a small amount. So if you do that, just make sure you check the range that your foil can travel. Make sure that you can get both max lift and some negative lift.
Yeah, definitely important. Nothing is one setting on that when it comes to that. When it comes to
Always
that
check
flap and
your
that
setting.
wand, yeah, it's always important to check the entire system when you make an adjustment. Very good. And one last question about the Traveler line. Do you guys touch it? What are your thoughts on the Traveler?
I do not. Since the Wishbone is a static setting for me, the sail is never going to be lower than the Wishbone. So it's just is what it is. I have the blocks so they can just barely not be too blocked, and then the aft bridle coming from the rudder head is always slack until the blocks are almost too blocked, to where it's just getting into the meat of it. So yeah, just making sure that the blocks can't touch, I think, is pretty huge, but close enough to them.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Reed. I think, we've done some testing with some extreme Traveler bridle settings, and I think my specific measurements are at like 19, 19, 30 is where I'm at right now. If as it gets windy, there's probably a little play there. I know that Sam specifically goes with very high bridle, with the idea of getting the block center. It certainly de-stresses the mane a lot. It'll feel a lot looser if you go to an extreme bridle setting, but you do lose a lot of leech tension, and it does seem to cost you some pointing at times. So I think it's something that everyone has to play with a little bit, but I also I've gone back and forth and ended up at a place where I don't touch my bridle that much.
Excellent. And we did have another question about the main pin, or the cant of the main foil. Do you guys ever move it forward or backward, or do you keep it in the center?
We tried it a little bit whenever we first got the new foils.
Yes.
And if it's super honking in some ways, I could see how the front pin is pretty attractive. But I feel like, and Connor and I have just stuck to the middle pin. And
Yes.
if you are just having trouble, like you're flying too high, I guess, going downwind, that you can I think you just go bow down a little bit. You just make up for the because all it does is basically change the angle of attack of the main foil, which you can do with the rudder head and twisting the grip to make the boat more bow down. So I think.
Sorry to jump in on Reed's thing real quick. Just a quick hot tip before Reed finishes his thing. Take some auto parts grease and grease everything in there. It'll make that pin adjustment smooth, and shorten your universal a little bit. Really helps. But anyway, sorry to interrupt, Reed.
No problem. Super
Keep going.
Yeah, I was just saying, I think because a lot of times we get caught out there with not being able to adjust settings on the water, such as the gearing or whatever else. So if you are feeling like you need or want to try going to the front pin, then you can get the same effect with just going more bow down.
Yeah, definitely. I would say just one more point to that. Kind of the rule of thumb, because I sail in some pretty big waves here, especially in the fall, up on Long Island Sound. If the rule of thumb I have is that if I'm wiping out a bunch downwind, I just go pin forward. That's it. But until that point, you can do exactly what Reed's talking about with the angle.
Honestly, I haven't tested the pin forward, so I can't speak to it. I just try and go a little more bow down if I'm having trouble staying in the water. But I think there's definitely a time for it. You know, if it's
I did a fair bit. I did a fair bit, but like I feel like, to both of y'all's points, is like it worked a lot when I had really a lot of trouble getting my pitch to go forward because the thing would just get jammed up. And the second I was able to get my pitch forward, I've never felt the need to go pin forward yet. But that doesn't mean it's slower or faster. That's the other thing that we just haven't tested it. In just terms of keeping you in the water, going pin forward on your rudder should save you most of the time.
Yeah, I would say for clay, just heeling to windward more would be advantageous. But great question, Clay.
Just hike harder.
I might have to unmute him so he can talk back.
Yeah.
Well, Connor, Reed, thank you for coming out and talking to us. If hopefully this will not be the last Waszp forum. We obviously want to continue these, especially when it's difficult to get everybody out and together in a group and sailing. Karen did from Hawaii wanted to kind of make an announcement to us. I must warn you, I have not vetted this, but I will unmute you, Karen, if you are still there.
Hello, yes. Can you hear me?
Hello. We can hear you. How are you?
Great, I'm good. Actually, the fleet just launched. We only have one lonely boat here left on the dock. Two. We still got CJ here. We have 10 boats here at our fleet now at Kaneohe Yacht Club, and 2 of them are club boats. And so, being that we're not going anywhere in these COVID times, we're not going to be able to come and make any events on the East Coast. So we wanted to let everybody know that the winner of the on the East Coast, we'd like to fund a trip to Hawaii for the winner to come sail with us.
Wow, that's awesome.
That is a pretty amazing announcement, I'd say.
So it might encourage a little more participation there if people are thinking it's not worth the risk. And then we'll fly you over here. We'll host you. We've got a boat here because we've got a couple of the club boats, and bring you over here for a week. And so whoever's the winner, and if the winner can't come or doesn't want to come for whatever reason, then it will go to the second place finisher.
Well, thank you, Karen.
That's awesome. And I hopefully these times pass pretty soon and we can come out and all have a regatta there.
That's the hopes, but probably not until this thing all passes. So we're trying to come up with solutions, and everybody's stoked to invite and host top sailor from the event.
Awesome.
And that would be this winter, November or December. Sorry, there is a Marine Corps base here. Launching jets today, so.
Well, thank you. We're all really jealous of seeing all the content that's coming out of Hawaii. It looks like a really good place to go sailing.
Yeah, I'd say it's a pretty good place. It's still the middle of the day here, so we have a program that is Waszp sailing every day at 2 o'clock. So we might be new, but we've been getting a lot of time on the water. All right, well, thank you for allowing me to make that announcement. Jesse's out on the coach boat, so he's gone. Everybody's gone. I got Steve and JP. Everybody else is on the water.
Well, fantastic. Well, thank you for hanging in there and listening to us all the way through. But and of course for the very, very generous offer on the table right now. That sounds exciting, and it looks like from the chat box that you've got some people motivated.
You better get practicing.
Exactly. Well, thank you again, everyone, for joining. Stay safe out there, and we will be in touch soon.
Thank you, Sam, for hosting us.
Of course, guys.
Thank you, Sam.
Have a good night.
All right.
Bye-bye.
Bye.